Talk about it. Howard Kramer, former curator and director of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and a good friend of Chuck Berry. Howard, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much, McGraw.
A lot of us only know Chuck Berry from the history books. He had a whole world before we ever came around. Howard, put into perspective what it was like to be on the radio and then to hear somebody who was light years ahead of what you were hearing on the radio when Chuck Berry came around.
Well, as a guy who wasn't around in the 50s to hear the birth of rock and roll, I know from speaking to all the people who were, all the performers who I know who were, whether it was, Graham Nash or Robert Plant, who would, tell me that it went from night to daytime when the music of Chuck Berry came on. They suddenly had a calling. And in the midst of highly sweetened pop music came along the stuff that just was swinging and grooving, and it spoke to them as young people, as individuals who idealized particularly American culture. The English guys in particular idealized American culture. And in the U.S., of course, young people were much more open to new music, and not just the music of their parents. So, Chuck brought all these incredible elements together at a time when it was just right for him.
I mean, it would be like listening to the radio today or Pandora or whatever, and then hearing music from like 2050, right? I mean, it must have been out of this world to hear this new sound come on the radio.
Well, I think it is less of a vision of the future than it was a vision of a hidden present. And that, the music that Chuck did, I mean, his influences were clear. Nat King Cole, who just immediately preceded him, Louis Jordan, who was ahead of him, preceded him by 10 years. So what he did was gave a popular voice to music that was there. It was mostly, the audience was mostly black, but the white kids caught on. And that was the real big difference about rock and roll. Most of the African-American artists made black music for black people, and white people came along for the ride. That was the big shock. Maybe the shock was it was happening under their nose and they didn't realize it.
Yeah. Is it true that Alan Freed got credits for songwriting so that he would play Chuck Berry's songs?
Well, there were certain hands washed along the way. When Maybelline came out, it was very, very well known, very well documented. Leonard Chess, who had signed Chuck to Chess Records, also had his publishing, which controls the copyright of the song as a songwriter. Gave pieces of it to one to Alan Freed, one actually the guy named Russ Fredo, who was, I believe, his landlord in Chicago, to help pay things off. That's how it was done. The record business now is looked at as this huge multinational, respectable thing, but back then it was run by guys who were just above junk men. It was not a pretty business, and that's just how it worked.
Hold on a second. Today, the record industry is known as fine, upstanding gentlemen?
Well, maybe not so. Maybe I misspoke, but it's certainly a multinational concern.
Is there one song that encapsulates Chuck Berry? It has to be Johnny B. Good, right?
Well, they sent it up in space back in the 70s, so even then people knew that it was the one. If you're going to attribute one to him, but the truth of the matter is his catalog of songs will stand among the best that this country has ever produced by any single artist.
Is he coming out with another album?
Yeah, Chuck has been working on recordings for years and years, and his son Charles Jr. basically took it upon himself to make sure the project was finished, and they announced it, I believe, last October to coincide with Chuck's 90th birthday, and the record is supposed to hit within the next month or so, I believe.
Wow. When was the last time you talked to him?
Last time I saw Mr. Berry was probably about 2.5 years ago, shortly before he retired from public view. He gave, I guess, his final performance in Blueberry Hill in October of 2014, and then decided it was time to, not do that so much anymore. And he did it on his own terms. Chuck Berry, there's a lot of people listening to this show right now who know him better than I do.
Right.
He was his own man. He did what he wanted to do, and he went out with dignity, and I got to hand it to him.
Could there have been Chuck Berry without Johnny Johnson?
Well, being that Chuck joined Johnny's band, that answers itself. But the musical symbiosis between those two is just amazing. I mean, you can listen to Chuck Berry records and ignore the guitar and listen to Johnny's piano and stand in awe of the beauty of that. They certainly were a yin and yang.
Yeah. Kind of sad that they had a falling out and never really patched it up, right?
Well, I think at the very end, there might have been, they finally got back together. But no, I think there were also some people whispering into Johnny Johnson's ear that, like, hey, you need to go after this. Johnny needed the money. I can't entirely blame him.
Yeah. Howard Kramer, former curator and director of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, on the passing of a St. Louis and the passing of a true legend, Chuck Berry. Howard, thanks for checking in.
Thank you very much.
You got it. 725, Big 550.